Right now, we are following two major breaking news stories for you this morning. First, the manhunt is on for the other suspects tied to the New Orleans terror attack that killed at least 15 people on New Year's Day. And we are learning more about the suspect behind the attack and how he was radicalized by ISIS.
And police are narrowing down their search for the suspect who detonated a Cybertruck right in front of a Trump hotel in Las Vegas. But while no official connection has been made between the incidents, there is a common thread tying them together. You're watching Fox and Friends First on this Thursday morning. I'm Ashley Strohmeyer. Carly Shimkus has the day off.
And I am Todd Pyro. Let's get right to Doug Lazater with the latest on the New Orleans attack. Doug.
Good morning. Congress is looking for answers here as this investigation has expanded well beyond New Orleans, but we'll begin there as the true magnitude of this attack is really beginning to sink in. Early yesterday morning, a truck rammed through a crowd that had gathered to celebrate the new year, killing at least 15 people and wounding a number of others. We are learning the identities of at least some of the victims of this horrific attack. The alleged driver, 42-year-old Shamsud Din-Jabbar, an Army veteran who at one point had deployed to Afghanistan. Police in Houston are searching what is believed to be the driver's home there. Investigators say an ISIS flag was found on the truck, and this is being investigated as a terrorist act.
We're a tough people. We're going to come back through this, but it's difficult. I mean, the loss of life still goes up. It's 15 now dead and still many struggling, fighting for their lives. I think what people want are candid answers. You don't need to sugarcoat this. You know, if there's some uncomfortable things we find along the way, let's get that information out.
President Biden emerged last night at Camp David.
I know I can speak for all Americans when I say our hearts are with the people of New Orleans after the despicable attack that occurred in the early morning hours. To all the families of those who were killed, to all those who were injured, to all the people of New Orleans who are grieving today, I want you to know I grieve with you.
President-elect Trump said this: the Trump administration will fully support the city of New Orleans as they investigate and recover from this act of pure evil. And investigators are still trying to determine whether there are any links between this attack in New Orleans and a Cybertruck that exploded outside the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas yesterday, killing the driver. Todd and Ashley.
Okay, Doug Lazater, thank you so much. We're going to bring in former FBI special agent and former Navy SEAL Jonathan Gilliam. Jonathan, thanks for joining us this morning to talk about this. You know, I heard someone on the network say last night that the criminal just has to get it right once, but law enforcement, they have to get it right every single time. So what is happening with the FBI and local law enforcement agencies? Do they just not have the ways and the means to get this right every single time? Do they not have the manpower to do this?
Sure, they have it. They have the ways and means. They have the manpower. What they don't have is the ability a lot of the times to think like they haven't thought before, to think outside the box. And I think this is a perfect example. It's not the first time we've seen it. It won't be the last. But when law enforcement sees a problem like this, and they see that people go to these locations day in and day out, that enough threat appears, so they put up a bollard to keep cars off that road, and something goes wrong, they just think, well, we'll get to it. We'll put a car there. It'll be all right. They don't think like the attacker. And if they had, they would have put something on the sidewalk. It doesn't matter if it's a 1,000-pound rock or a car on each side of the sidewalk, as well as a car in front that could maneuver when somebody needed to go down the road. It's really that simple. Think outside the box and don't be afraid to say, we don't do it that way typically, but we're going to try it.
So what is the FBI doing at this very moment, 24 hours following the attack, whether it's in Texas, Louisiana, elsewhere, to try to put all the pieces together, Jonathan?
Well, so like I just talked about thinking outside the box, here's where thinking inside the box works very well, is that when we talk about the FBI taking the lead, we're talking about the FBI leading the Joint Terrorism Task Force. So both in New Orleans and in Las Vegas, there are Joint Terrorism Task Forces made up of many, many different local, state, and other federal agencies. And all of their resources get poured into this JTTF so that they can quickly, much quicker than normal law enforcement, they are able to quickly scrub details about the evidence that they find, and they can go clear across the nation in a rapid pace because of the connections and the ability for the Bureau to reach out to other agencies and other JTTFs. So that's what they're doing right now as they follow just a plethora of information in both of these cases that may end up coming back to the same culprits.
Jonathan, let's talk about what happened in Las Vegas the same day. You know, law enforcement said they didn't believe that the suspect in either New Orleans or in Las Vegas had any type of tie to each other. But I feel like you can make all kinds of speculations. You could say that, you know, this was just a coincidence that these happened on the first day of the year. You could say that this was, you know, some sick form of a sign that they're giving, you know, with the Tesla and Elon Musk and his ties to Trump in front of the Trump Hotel. What are your thoughts on this? Was this purely a coincidence, or do you think there is some sort of a tie?
Well, the fact that they rented these vehicles in both cases on an app that is relatively unfamiliar with most people, that is very intriguing to me from an investigative standpoint. But you have to remember, from whoever is saying things like they are just not connected, you never want to say that as an investigator. You do not want to rule out something until you can completely rule it out. And as far as I know, they haven't collected enough information to determine if these are two different cells. Remember, the people that got on one plane on 9/11 and hijacked one plane didn't know the individuals on the other plane. And they may not have even known the people who funded it or who were training them. So these groups will act in cells, and when they do that, they may not know each other, and there may not be a physical connection, but ideologically or somewhere along the way, a planning connection may occur. I do think, though, one thing that stands out about this attack, we know that it was a Cybertruck. It was underneath a Trump tower right next to his name, and they used fireworks. And recently, the ones that used fireworks, where these were not condensed and packed into like a pressure cooker like the Sarnaff brothers, where it was an actual bomb, they just poured a bunch of fireworks in the back and set this stuff on fire and caused it to blow up. And who normally uses that? Antifa. They use fireworks in almost all of their riots.
Jonathan, I want to go back to the New Orleans attack for a moment and specifically focus on Texas, focus on Houston. Are you hearing anything from your sources as to how extensive the investigation in Houston could grow? Because obviously they're trying to get into the guy's house. There's concerns that there could be bombs and explosives in there, but they're also looking at the neighborhood. So are you hearing anything from your people in law enforcement as to how widespread this could be?
I have a good source that was telling me, but I have not been able to confirm it through a second person. But this is an investigator, that this individual is not Arab. He's a black American, and that this is a Nation of Islam group, that this individual practiced Islam, but under the Nation of Islam. Now, I don't know if I haven't been able to verify that with a second source, but that possibility is out there. I think from what I've seen that's coming in is that we know that they chose New Orleans, but we have to ask why. Why did they go all the way there? That night, they could have chosen in any state the ability to kill numerous people, but they chose that state and that venue. I think we're going to see a link somewhere why they chose that. Either somebody was related to that area, somebody else lived over there that coordinated it, and he just drove the truck in. But there had to be a coordination in some way, shape, or form to New Orleans.
Important questions. Jonathan T. Gilliam, thanks so much for your insight. We appreciate it.
Todd, can I say one other thing?
Sure, quickly.
I always do this to you. I think it's very imperative that Donald Trump, just like he put Tom Homan as the deportations are. I think this is a very important thing because Tom Homan is an expert who worked in that field. We need experts who worked in the field of these types of operations that, like the old Red Cell, Navy SEAL Red Cells, where they worked as terrorists, planning these ops so they could reverse engineer them and share with everybody how, when, where, and why a terrorist or a school shooter or these types of individuals would attack. If we do that and people take it seriously, we could form an entire threat assessment throughout all industry across the country, and it would be so inexpensive and easy to do that it would blow people's minds, and effective if people would do it.
No time like the president. Less than 3 weeks to go. Hopefully the president hears that suggestion and follows through with it. Jonathan, thank you.